Rocky Badass Mutta. What an absolute pleasure to have you here on my show. After all the things that I've heard about you, girlfriend, what I want to first know is, how did you become such a badass? Let's take you way back to your earliest memory of when someone told you that there's a certain way you need to do something and you thought, no way is it going to happen that way. Because I've got a feeling that you're quite the warrior.
I think my parents would tell you that I have always been very strong-headed, to put it nicely.
You don't have to mince words on the show.
I think my parents would probably say that I was bossy as hell growing up, and I'd boss around my brother, I'd boss around my cousins, and but yeah, I think I've always just had this strong will, and that there was nobody that could ever tell me that I couldn't do anything. And I think that really came from my parents. They really formed my identity and shaped my self-esteem and really pushed me to do things even when I was afraid. And I think that really framed what the rest of my life was gonna look like. So growing up, my parents would come and say good night to the kids when we were all sleeping in our bedrooms, when they would go to bed, because we had like a serious early 8 o'clock bedtime growing up. So
you're lucky, mine was 7:30.
Okay, I thought we were the only ones that had curfews. No. Okay, and then so my dad would always come in and he's like, Rocky, you can do anything that you want to, and just whispered into my ear. And I think those were the beginnings, like the beginning foundations of some serious self-esteem and a serious belief in myself.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. It's really interesting that your father had that kind of insight back then, because nowadays, there's so many different ways that we can communicate, the psyche of, human nature. But back then, your father having this kind of insight that if he was to just whisper something positive in his daughter's ear right before she goes to bed, that hopefully it'll just become indelible. It'll go into her dream world. It'll go into, her manifestation thought process. I feel that's happened with you, and I'm going to totally talk about your career, because I really believe that a lot of what you've done, why you do it, kind of stems from the belief system and the ideology that you grew up with.
Right.
So you are a badass Sikh. And I'm going to keep using that word because I don't know any other word to describe who you are and what you've accomplished, which is incredible. But when you go back to, those times when you were growing up, we're trying to figure out our identity, the identity of who we are as South Asians, right? As well as the identity of who we are in a culture that is strewn with so many other cultures, especially in Canada, right? I mean, you literally, thrown into this melting pot of a ton of different ways that you could potentially live, right? How did you make sense of all of that?
It was looking at all different aspects of my identity that I think was really critical. So I was introduced to feminist thought at a very early age. So when I was growing up, there were a lot of different people coming to the house from a lot of different walks of life. And so I feel like I grew up in a very privileged household where I was able to question and explore different walks of identity or labels that were put on me from the extended family or from the community at large. And I often tell this story. So 2 things is, one, my dad refused to take dowry back in those times when he was married. He actually ran away from home the day before his wedding because he refused to accept dowry. And we were told those stories growing up from extended family members. And that really that allowed me to, I think, really frame that, okay, we're allowed to rebel, we're allowed to question, we're allowed to have our own opinions and do things according to what we feel is right, because that was my father's way of living. And then I think in grade 6, someone had come over to the house and they're like, your daughter doesn't know how to make tea. Oh my God, she's in grade 6. So my dad's like, okay, Rox, you need to learn how to make tea. And then I was like, but Dad, that's sexist. Why do I have to learn to make tea? And he was like, you know what, you're right. And so then all of the kids had to learn to make tea, which was myself and both my brothers.
I love that.
So I think those were being able to even have those conversations, to be able to explore why, allowed me to really look at how I identify myself. So whether it was as Sikh, whether it was as Indian, whether it was as a South Asian, whether it was as a woman, like all different aspects of my identity, I was given the freedom to explore.
So how did you feel? I mean, here you are in your home where you're given, you know, this freedom, this flexibility to be able to explore the different realms of who you are. How did the outer world feel about that within your cultural group?
That was really rough.
Yeah.
That was difficult because
Your father probably got a beating on that as
oh,
well.
totally,
From the
totally.
community, right?
All the time. So I was allowed to explore and go out from a young age. I was allowed to like go here, go there, and the other people were like, "How are you letting your daughter go out? Why is she allowed to?" Even the little things. How is she allowed to go to the mall? Why do you let her go to the mall with her friends? Like just the smallest things. And then as I grew up, it started changing. Like she's allowed to have guy friends because I was allowed to have guy friends. Guys were allowed to call my house. I was allowed to have them over. We would hang out and chill. And then as I got older, then it was like traveling internationally. And people were calling my parents and saying, "How are you letting your unwed daughter travel?" So a lot of those labels came from the external, and it was
Yes.
really difficult. Their expectations of me, like I liked a lot of poetry. I liked different things because I was exposed to that, different types of films. And then they would all be like, "Hey, you're so weird. You're like the odd one out." My friend circle was incredible, but then I think I was really misunderstood. I didn't look the same. I had my hair cut really short. Like I loved TLC growing up.
Yeah.
So like T-Boss was like my fave. So just having the hair cut that short, and had it dyed blonde at such a young age, because my parents were all about like self-discovery and figuring out who you are, and you're going to go through so many different fashions and fads, and just go ahead and explore them. But it was really difficult with the community, like misunderstanding who I was. And then a lot of Punjabi girls weren't allowed to hang out with me because they're like, too much freedom. She doesn't have the values, the good Indian values.
So how did your parents feel about that? Because obviously they extended this freedom, this thing that we call freedom, which, you know, is, I find, such an interesting and provocative concept.
Right.
Because we're all born free and we all die and liberate to freedom.
Right.
So it's that time in between that culture, society, people's expectations, which is the worst of it,
Right.
just really create a difficult challenge for us, especially as women, right?
Right, yes.
But your father really, I mean, you know, I know I keep bringing this up, but I just feel it's a really important point to bring up, especially at the time when we grew up, right? How did they deal with this kind of barrage of criticism from people that they do, you know, have to communicate with, that it's their circle,
Right.
right? How did they deal with that?
I think my mother and my father dealt with things differently. See, my dad, like you could call him a hippie, you could call him a whole bunch of different things. So he really set the tone, I think, for the family, whereas my mom was a lot more conservative. And she's opened up over the years, but I try to understand both lenses. Like my dad's been a rebel. I think he's been on his own since he was 14. So he's very much rebellious. He's lived all over the world. And I think he spent a lot of his formative years actually in Germany before he came over to Canada. And so he, like his answer to everyone was like, "Screw them, I don't care. I don't care what anyone says. As long as my kids are happy at the end of the day and they're following their soul's path, that's all I care about." I think my mom, and it was difficult, like you grew up in a super conservative house, you weren't even allowed to have friends, you were never allowed to listen to the radio, you couldn't watch any television or any movies.
Wow.
And then
This was your mom?
Yeah. And then
And why?
that was the way she was raised. That was her family, like super conservative. My mom had a more difficult time with the community and those things affected her because she was raised to have those things affect her. Like the community is everything.
Yes.
What society thinks of you, your reputation. But for my dad was like, he didn't care about anything. He's like a lone soldier. He doesn't give a shit.
So how much of who your father is and what he represents and what he identifies with versus your mom do you feel that, you know, is within you?
I would say when I was in my teenage years, I had a really challenging relationship with my mother. And I was rebellious, and my father understood me, and he never put any restrictions on me. And so we used to have these incredible intellectual like conversations, and I was like, at the time I would have identified 100% with my father. But I think as I came into my womanhood, And I started to understand my mom as a woman and what her journey was and the trauma that she's been through, like what it means to be raised in this ultra conservative home, then to be picked up all of a sudden and just move with a stranger to another country and to deal with the level of racism she dealt with. And so then I began to understand her as a woman.
It took me years to actually finally realize that I'm expecting my parents to get everything about me, right? But they didn't have the same expression of life. They didn't have the same tools or the resources to understand what I understand, or even the same experiences. It wasn't until I got to that understanding did I realize that, hang on a minute, they, right, have every right to believe in and want the things they want. And why should they agree with me when that's not what their life's path is?
Right.
And as soon as you get to that point, it's almost like this aha moment.
Right.
And that battle between the two women in the house subsides. What did you have a moment like that as well? Share that with me.
So I was going out on a date, and so very open with my mom. So I was like, okay, Mom, I'm going on a date. He was coming to pick me up from my house. And so I was almost out the door, and she's like, what does that feel like? And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, what does it feel like to go on a date? And it was like, the date was like, it was nice, but I kept thinking about, why would you ask me that? And then I started like, of course you would ask me that. You've never been on a date. You've never been like wined and dined. You never had any choice in who you were going to be with. I don't even know if you've ever even had a crush or what that would have felt like for you. And so when I came home from the date was fantastic. And my mom was waiting up, and she's like, how was it? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, how was the date? And I said, it was great. He gave me butterflies. And she's like, how did he give them? Did he give them in a box? Did he give them in a cage? And I was like, right. I'm like, Mom, it's a feeling. I had a conversation with her, and then I started to understand, oh, this is why you are the way you are. This is why you're closed off. This is why your expectations are such. You've been through this, like, or these many traumas that you've never even felt like you could share. And that was actually what started leading to a lot of my work, focusing on Indian women's sexuality.
Yes.
What does it mean? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for that generation? And so that's really what got me thinking.
And that kind of entire cultural, gender, societal gap just in one generation is mind-blowing.
Right.
And I know that your work has really identified a lot of that.
Right.
Do you, would I be right when I say that you're a self-proclaimed feminist?
Oh, definitely.
Okay, what does that word mean to you?
I don't know what that word means to me. I think I'm still trying to figure it out. But I think for me, it just means having the ability to decide who I want to be and being treated equally and fairly for it. But I struggle with labels. Like, I don't want to be labeled anything. Like, I just want to be. And I think society's constantly trying to understand, and they understand by placing labels on you.
What does it mean to Rakhi Mutta? And it's important that you answer this question, just because your entire career, as organic or as strategic as it may have been, and we're going to talk about that next, I feel hinges upon your understanding of what that word means for you.
Right. And I think that's it. Feminist to me is very personal, and it's my belief that I am equal to anybody out there. I am able to do anything that I want to do, and my gender will not be a determinant of that.
Hi everyone, this is Open Chess TV with me, Raj Girn. If you like the chat that you just finished watching, I really hope that you will subscribe to my channel for more intelligent, provocative, relevant conversations with some of your favorite celebrities.